everybody doing? Thanks for taking the time to come to this presentation. There's a lot of great presentations at Summit, so I appreciate you coming to mine. I know I'm also competing with lunch, which is not easy to do, but I do appreciate you guys coming out. Listen to what I have to say. So that handsome young man on screen is me. For those in the room who don't know me, I know exactly what you're thinking, and I thought that guy would be taller. I'm still waiting on that last growth spurt, but I'm not holding my breath anymore. But seriously, my name is Rob Smedley. I'm the Vice President of Technology, responsible for all things data at Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products. So that is a segment lovingly known internally at Disney as DPEP. And we are responsible for global parks and resorts, for Disney signature experiences, which includes Disney Cruise Line, Disney Vacation Club, Adventures by Disney, as well as our consumer products business, so our Disney stores, our Shop Disney e-commerce business, as well as licensing, publishing, and games. So that's a big area. It's an absolutely incredible company to work for. I'm not going to lie, I am a little bit biased, but I think there's no better place in the world to do what I do than Disney. Our data and our scope is so big and so broad. There are just incredible opportunities everywhere you look to transform the business with data and to make a real impact on our customers. We truly do power the magic with data at Disney. So it's a pretty incredible thing. It's also, I believe, the one place in the world where you can walk 100 yards outside of your office and take a headshot in front of the Millennium Falcon. That's where I am standing right there, so it is pretty cool. And over 12 years at Disney, I haven't lost sight of that, so. Here we go. So I don't think Disney is unlike many companies who are currently trying or have recently tried to modernize and transform their data strategy, their data technology, and their data platforms. There's lots of different motivations you may have for doing that. I've had the luck of being on a roller coaster through almost all of them over the last few years. For us, it really started out as an effort to be ready for machine learning and AI. And we were focused there for a long time, and then there was a sudden shift there where the focus really became about getting out of our Disney-managed data centers. Enormous cost savings associated with moving our stuff to the cloud, shutting down all the, our data centers where we had a lot of our technology. Your motivations may be similar, may be different. Generative AI, everybody wants to do it, yes. Large language models, we hear about that everywhere we go this week. I hear you, we're trying to do the same thing. But if you're not focused on the data foundation first, good luck. And I think companies that focused on that data foundation 2 years ago or whatever, they're going to be ready. If you're not there, focus on it now, because you can get started with all the generative AI you want, and you can maybe even make a little progress. Without having that foundation, you're gonna hit a wall pretty quickly. So what is that foundation? And there's a lot of buzzwords. And I'm going to talk in the next few slides about kind of my own journey, my company's journey through all of those buzzwords. How many people have had some senior leader in your company come and say, we solve all our problems, we need a data lake. They probably didn't even really know what they meant. Probably, misusing or using that in a wrong way pretty often. I think we had, that's a similar situation for us. So. Before you get into the what and that, kind of how you're going to do that, do I need a data lake? Do I need a warehouse? I think you've got to start with the right strategy. And there are a million ways to articulate what your data strategy is. But for me, it was really important to start really simple and really basic in terms that I think would resonate with people. And that strategy for me was data liquidity. So that's really everything that I'm doing now revolves around trying to achieve data liquidity. So what is data liquidity? I'm going to read a little bit. So data liquidity refers to the seamless use and reuse of data across an organization. And we can measure data liquidity by looking at how we reuse our data assets and recombine those data assets to support our decision making, to support value creation with data. And it really is the key to all of the things you see on the screen, right? Agile, cost-effective data management is going to come from having liquidity in your data. Partnership and collaboration across your business. For me, for Disney, really big. Our business is very, very broad, and teams can be siloed in their functions. So in order to collaborate across that, at the company using the data. We need to have liquidity in our data. Security and compliance. I can talk about security and compliance all day long. Starting in 2018, I believe, GDPR, CCPA. There are 5 states, I believe, right now that have similar laws to CCPA. There are more coming. If you don't achieve that kind of reuse of your data assets, they start to spread. And as your personal information starts to spread, it becomes harder and harder and harder to achieve compliance. It unlocks data governance. Data governance is an area that we're very, very focused on right now. In my organization, it's an area that had been neglected for a long time. It's a critical function that I think a lot of companies actually struggle with, and achieving liquidity, I think, helps get you there. Ultimately, you're going to drive your data-driven business by achieving liquidity. Data, I think, at its core by nature is meant to be reused and recombined. It wants to be reused. But you need to set yourself up properly in order to unlock that. You need to be thinking about building not just data pipelines or views of data, but strategic data assets. And when you're building them, sometimes you also need to separate the context that drove the creation of the asset in the first place. Right? We don't want to answer questions. That's easy. We want to be thinking about building assets that are reusable that, hey, by the way, also answer these questions. And they're going to answer other questions as well. So that's data liquidity. It's not the flashiest strategy in the world. But I do think it's kind of the start of everything you want to do, whether it's LLMs or something else. So we achieve liquidity, I think, in a number of ways, but data architecture is kind of near and dear to my heart when it comes to achieving that data liquidity. There's no patents pending on here when I talk about this, right? But data for me exists in my mind in layers. I have my raw data, sources and systems and wearables and you name it, Internet of Things, everybody's generating data. Bring that raw data in, don't touch it, cleanse that data, conform that data so that it can be used. From there, we get to transform that data into business contextual data, something that makes sense to a business user and doesn't represent some transactional system that you have. And on top of that, we build insights. Think about a Disney example, right? So, I bring in my raw data. I have, an engineer wants to replay that data for whatever reason. I don't want them going back to a source system, some transactional system, saying, hey, send me those events again, or hey, can you generate me a file that I can pull in because I need to replay those events, right? I go to my raw layer, all of my data is there. I have an analyst or a data scientist, they have some hypothesis, I don't know. They need to go explore. So they jump into the data catalog and they see cleansed, usable data that they can go explore, and they can go, do their data exploration, start thinking about their feature engineering. I have a manager at a hotel. They need to know how many people are arriving at Disney's Grand Floridian Hotel today, because I need to staff my front desk to accommodate that volume. So they can pull a simple report off a business-focused view of a resort reservation, some resort reservation table, staff themselves appropriately. Oh, but then I have my marketing team. They want to target people who are arriving at the Grand Floridian who don't yet have a dining reservation. That's a pretty good marketing use case, right? They can reuse that same resort reservation table and combine that with their dining reservation table, and there you go, right? The really simple example, right? You're gonna get what I'm saying there. I think as you mature in that process of reusing, recombining, and creating new things, that's where the idea of this data marketplace comes in. You hear Snowflake talking about their data marketplace. It's an incredible thing, right? But internally, I think that should be the goal, right? Let me create a marketplace of data, a marketplace of insights that you can pick and choose and use and combine and build your models and advance your business. So that's what we're trying to achieve. I started at Disney 12 years ago, I mentioned, but I started in the data space quite a bit after that. Most of my career has been in traditional software engineering, not data. I think it was about 2018 where I jumped in the data space. For a long time, this is where Disney was, the legacy data warehouse. And it served us well for a very long time. So we had great big Teradata warehouse sitting in our data center in Orlando, right back behind the Magic Kingdom. And it ran the business at Disney for a long time, and it was great. But I don't know, sometime several years ago, the importance of data seemed to suddenly become much, much larger. The volume of data was much, much bigger, and the use cases that we wanted to achieve with the data were much more complex, and we just hit a wall. The on-premise appliance sitting in the data center just couldn't scale anymore. And I was locked in by compute and storage, and that was my constraint every single day. You know, somebody goes home, has dinner, has maybe a couple too many glasses of wine, writes some bad SQL. I wake up in the morning and the entire platform's down. I don't know, maybe a little bit dramatic. But those are the types of risks that we live with every day, where a bad actor can slow things down. And I slow one thing down, it slows the next thing down, the next thing fails, I have a dependency. That's not a good place to live. And it carried with it a heavy support burden. Having to worry about hardware and networks and failing hard drives and like physical security into the data center where I needed some third party to come in and swap out hard drives. Like it wasn't a cheap thing for us to maintain, and especially with antiquated capabilities. I think the most difficult part of our legacy data warehouse architecture was our data architecture, though. So, you know, the traditional ETL design where I'm taking in all of this data and I'm doing complex transformations before I can land and use that data didn't work out terribly well, I think. In the long run, we try to solve everyone's problem with a single view of data. And to solve everybody's problem, you have to have quite a bit of complexity. And that complexity makes management of your data very, very difficult. Jobs failing that I need to troubleshoot. And I have 200,000 lines of SQL that I need to sort my way through is really very difficult. If my jobs aren't failing, maybe there's a quality issue. Maybe it's not even my fault. Some system made a change, the quality is impacted, they didn't know it. But for me to be able to find that, very hard. I'm looking at data, I don't know what this field means. This was code that was written in 2005. That person's retired now. So you know, that's where we were. I jumped into the data space, I think, I don't know, several months maybe into probably the moment where some senior executives said, hey, we need a data lake. So that's what we were trying to accomplish. And we got to head down the path of solving some of those big problems. You know, the separation of storage and compute is great. We had unlimited scalability, and the cost of that storage was pennies. Our initial path down the data lake journey was a Hadoop platform. So moving from a Teradata platform to a Hadoop platform is a pretty massive shift in skill sets. We invested a lot of money in training, trying to I guess, upskill, if you want to use that word, our team. But that's a pretty big ask to move from one platform to another. It still carried with it a massive support burden. We had all of the same things that we had to worry about in the cloud with Hadoop that we did with Teradata on-premise. We also had things like managing clusters and name nodes and Kerberos keys. My God, that's tough. So we made a shift at some point because it wasn't working particularly well. We made a shift, I think, away from Hadoop, and we tried to go to more like native Amazon components. But that's a burden too. Great products in Amazon, but they're yours to manage. And we still had, still had the high cost of ownership and a terrible time governing that data. If you look at just CCPA and customers who have a right to be forgotten, and there's fines associated with that non-compliance. So when somebody comes and says, all right, I want you to forget me, and I have 100 million files sitting in an S3 bucket with data littered all over the place, that's quite an effort. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of discipline and complex custom code that we wrote to manage all that. In the end, we kind of leave core users behind. It's harder to use. It doesn't perform even nearly as well as what they were used to. We discovered Snowflake sometime around there. Really, at the time, just as a place to put the data. So, all right, I have all this data sitting in an S3 bucket somewhere. I need to put it somewhere somebody can use it and actually perform when I run a SQL. And that was our first kind of dipping our toe into Snowflake. And then, I don't know, a few years ago, that first transition of my motivation changed. While we were out trying to do machine learning, there was an acceleration of having to get out of our data center. So all of a sudden, I was like, well, put that on the shelf. Let's go get out of the data center. And that's where we kind of really went into Snowflake, I think, for the first time. And the idea, I'll go to my next thing, was to create this cloud data warehouse. But we were going to do a lift and shift of what we had in Teradata. That was the fastest way, the best way for us to get out of the data center, not disrupt the tens of thousands of users that we have using this data. So we'd lift and shift. It'd be backwards compatible for the most part. If I had a report that worked against Teradata, I can run that against a Snowflake, and it would work just fine. And overall, I'd say that project was a huge success. It was a huge undertaking. We got everything migrated. We retired our Teradata infrastructure. It's gone now. We moved all that Hadoop stuff that we had been working on into Snowflake. We had some things hanging out in Redshift. I don't even remember how I got there. We moved that stuff as well. And it was good. I mean, noticeable performance improvements. Things that took 5 minutes in Teradata was taking a minute in Snowflake. It was great. The cost of support, at least from like a platform operation standpoint, much, much better. I didn't have to worry about all this. Snowflake managed all this stuff for us. It did require extensive cost optimization. I think when we first went live, there was definitely sticker shock. It was probably 2-3x what we were paying in Teradata. But we were pretty eyes wide open about that. That wasn't, while I was surprised when I saw the bill, I was like, well, okay, I'm actually not surprised. We knew this was going to happen. You can't really take SQL that was written 10 years ago and just plop it into Snowflake and expect it's going to run in an optimal way. So we did spend some time and some effort optimizing what was running in Snowflake. We saw incredible performance improvements. I'm scanning the room. Is Rory? There's Rory. Is Rory here? There he is. If you want to learn more about the cost optimization, make sure you stop by Rory's presentation tomorrow at 12:30, I believe. And he'll take you through some of those details. But incredible work was done to bring those costs down. But in the end, we ended up with a modern platform and legacy patterns. So if I'm thinking about data liquidity, we're still not there. And there's consequences to that choice to lift and shift rather than refactor. You know, those complex ETL patterns, they're still brittle. They still fail at a high rate. They're still really hard to troubleshoot. It's really hard to monitor and observe quality, if not impossible. We have some, I think, maybe some rules-based type things that we can do, but they're reactive. I have an issue. It's like, oh, okay, now I know a little bit more about how you're using that data. Let me build some little monitor in there so I can find it. So, you know, not a lot of improvement from that standpoint. We still have that same complex data architecture, so it still leads to all those same problems. So we still have duplication. We still have silos. What does the user do when they go into my Snowflake warehouse and the data is so complex that they can't use it? Well, they pull it out. They throw it into some Frankenstein spreadsheet or, you know, some notebook where they're writing a ton of code, you know, trying to just do basic cleansing of data. I don't know what the statistic is. There's different articles you can read that will say, you know, your average data science project is going to be, I don't know what, 80% sourcing and cleansing of data, wrangling data, and 20% data science. Well, we're still there. And it's problematic because that hurts your business, for sure, because you're wasting time. But you're also creating risk. You know, those silos, all that leakage of data, I don't know where it all goes. So, I got my right to forget request. You better have a lot of discipline if you're going to let that data leak out of your platforms. Because if someone makes a mistake, it's probably not intentional. It's still $2,500 a person. That's an intentional fine for a violation of a CCPA request. So compliance still pretty impossible. And the value, not there. The liquidity, not there. So I don't know, maybe about a year ago, I think we had the right attention from leadership at Disney where we said, all right, now is the time for us to really buckle down and figure out what is the right reference architecture for us to try to achieve that data liquidity. We weren't talking about large language models yet. So that wasn't even I didn't even have to use that as a sales pitch at the time. And I did a lot of research. My team did a lot of research, a lot of due diligence. We did, you know, POCs with different products on the market. There are a lot of great products on the market. Where we ended up was, I think, what I think is the sweet spot, which is the data cloud. There are implementations that people have done where they've kind of separated that lake house, warehouse, whatever you want to call it, with different products. And I've seen that work extremely well. It gave me a little heartburn which is why I think we went a little more headfirst into Snowflake for our kind of future state reference architecture. I didn't like the idea of having to manage 2 different platforms, having to teach my team 2 different sets of, well, I'm not teaching anybody any skills, I guess, but having them learn 2 different sets of skills. How am I going to manage Snowflake and, say, Databricks right at the same time? And the overhead that comes with that. So we ended up with an architecture that's pretty heavily into Snowflake. We run Snowflake in AWS. We use a lot of AWS components to get data in, Kinesis and Amazon's data migration service to get data in. But from there, we go pretty hard into Snowflake. And we get all of the great things, right? I can bring all of my structured and unstructured data in, just like any other solution, just like any other lake. I have pretty much unlimited scalability. We've certainly tried to test that out, and we haven't run into any issues there. My workloads are isolated, so my business partner who had a couple of too many glasses of wine and wrote bad SQL, that's okay. They'll pay their price in the morning, but nobody else does. I mentioned that I come from a very traditional software engineering background. And when I came into the data space, one of the things that was hard for me to swallow at the time was the maturity level from traditional software engineering and what that was in data engineering. And it was shocking that data engineering kind of hadn't gotten even anywhere close. And with Snowflake implementation, especially with dbt, which I really, really love, we get to start using some of those engineering best practices. CI/CD, test automation, stuff that's like second nature if you've been doing software engineering for a long time, suddenly is a reality. We're writing better code, we have better quality. I think it's just great. Our performance is predictable. Every day I wake up and I know how things are going to perform. It's best in class. I mean, part of our evaluation years ago, that first time we used Snowflake, we looked at every cloud warehouse product on the market. And we did our own personal benchmarks. I don't believe what the salesperson's going to tell me. We're going to do our benchmarks, and we saw incredible performance there. Governance is pretty low friction. So instead of digging through 100 million files somewhere, I have data in Snowflake that I can manage very, very easily. You start putting great products on top of that, and it's pretty seamless. We're taking a hard look right now at Big ID, for example, which I think is really going to help us automate a lot of that stuff. We're in the process still. I don't want to pretend like we're done. We're very much in the process of creating that kind of multi-tiered architecture. And I think that's what's going to get us to true liquidity. It takes discipline and it takes governance of what you're doing. It's really easy to say, I'm going to reuse this data asset, and maybe it's easy for me to just create something off here on the side. So we got to be disciplined around that. But we can meet the needs of all of our personas. I think those early days on the focus on AI and machine learning, it was like, it's data science, and that's great. 99% of our users are not writing custom machine learning models. They're not doing large language models. They simply want data. They want sometimes a tabular report so they can just run their business, and we can't forget about them. We also can't forget about the people who want to do the large language models. We have to nail all of that. At the end of the day, you have less time operating. You get more time innovating, and that's where we're trying to go. I don't know if everybody here got to see the keynote yesterday. I thought it was really great. Listen to Frank and Jensen, and there was a question I think at the end, and they were asking them. Well, I think it was like, how do you get started? How are you going to get started? And Jensen was talking about large language models, certainly not about refactoring your data. But he said, I would take the most valuable and important database that I have, and he said, I'd put the smartest person in front of it, right? And I'd build my language model in front of that. So it's really kind of the same approach that Disney is taking right now in marching towards this kind of future state architecture that we have. What's our most important or most valuable database? Let's start there. For us, that's customer data. I think for a lot of people that is. For Jensen, it wasn't actually. It was supply chain data. But start there and do that refactoring, and then go on to your second most important, and then your third most important. And I don't know. The idea is that we'll get through all of them. We'll have this brand new refactor platform, and we'll retire the old one. But And we'll see. That's not a short-term thing. We have a lot of data. We have hundreds of systems at Disney that generate data. And some of them we use every single day, and some of them not so much. So there may come a time where we look and say, all right, maybe now's a good time to stop for now. But now what? I have two Snowflake instances running. I have one that's got kind of an old architecture, one a new architecture. I don't really want to muddy the waters by bringing crappy data into my pristine new platform. So how do I do that? And I think one of the ways that we can accomplish that, and it's one of the things that I think is one of the real differentiators that Snowflake has to offer, which is data sharing. It's really easy for me to say, yeah, take this kind of old complex table that you have that's not the perfect thing. I don't love it. But if you want to join that up and do some analysis against this brand new refactored customer data that I have, Snowflake sharing is a great way to do that. So that's kind of one use case that I didn't even really think about at the time for Snowflake data sharing. Philosophically, I'm a believer in the data mesh, and I'm a believer that not all data should be centralized into one single place. I do believe that, and that is kind of, I think, core to some of our architecture. But I do think you have to be careful with how granular you are in federating your data, in my opinion. Maybe it's different for others. But when you have data that you're frequently integrating, frequently commingling, there's overhead to spreading it out all over the place and using Snowflake data sharing or other tools that allow kind of federation of query across data. So I'm careful. I tend to actually, despite what I say, sometimes move a little closer towards centralization of data. But I do think it's important to have that ability inside of your architecture, that if I want to keep that data in different places. And at Disney, within my segment, I have some control over pushing that data into the same place. But if I want to do cross-segment work, I'm not going to do that, right? So Disney's a collection of companies, and we all work together, but we all exist like separate companies. So within parks, we have Snowflake. Within Disney streaming, we have Snowflake, but we're two very separate entities. Several years ago, well, not several, I guess it was probably pre-pandemic though, we started talking about this desire to maybe do some analytics across the segments. Let me do some analytics about those people in the parks, how many of them might subscribe to Disney Plus or something like that. And those early days of conversation, we were talking about like, hey, all right, you guys generate me a CSV file, and you can FTP it over, and it's totally bizarre for me to even think about that being a solution right now, because it's like how simple it is right now if I wanted to do that, right? Just by using Snowflake data sharing. Seamless, frictionless, secure, fine-grained access, no latency. I don't have to sit and wait. We do have some cloud agnostic capabilities as well. I think that's important. I think someday, maybe not today, but someday could really unlock global capabilities for a company like Disney, for a segment like parks. We don't really do this today. It's a complex legal situation, but we have parks in Paris, in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai, California, Florida. It'd be really cool for us to look at our guests and our customers across all of those, and to be able to do that with sharing capabilities is it's pretty powerful. So what next? There's some really interesting things that I think we're going to be looking into from our side. I'm really interested in open formats and external storage. I think that is a huge risk mitigation. What Snowflake and other very large vendors are doing right now with Iceberg is really intriguing. We've looked pretty hard at Iceberg. I looked at Delta. I think Iceberg, my opinion, maybe next year you can come back and see if it was reality, but I think Iceberg is gonna be the one who wins in that, if there's a race there. It helps us mitigate that risk of putting all of my data into one place. It also helps me be a little more bullish on some, I hear these new features that Snowflake's releasing, and they're really exciting. I can go a little more into using some of these tools, knowing that I've mitigated some of my risk by having an open format, but maybe keeping some of my data externally stored. Streaming, we'll be early adopters on Snowflake streaming, I think. A few years ago, 15-minute latency latencycycy into the analytics platform, that's great. And then 15 turned to 5, and 5 was fine. Like, what analysis are you doing where you need data in less than 5 minutes? Well, then it became a minute. Is a minute enough? Can we get it? Is that okay if we get to a minute? I don't know. When I started in the data space, we used to talk about this really clear line between analytical use cases and operational use cases. We were analytics. So 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, that had to be okay, because we're analytics. If you thought that you were doing analytics and you needed sub-second latency, that's just a lie. But I believed at the time, this is probably 2018, 2019, I believed at the time that those lines were starting to blur, and pretty soon they would disappear completely, and there'd be no separation. There's no analytics and operational. The two would have to merge. It was just, I think, maybe a week or two ago, I was looking at a PowerPoint presentation that I had built, which was like, oh, this is my vision. It was like a technical architecture. You guys probably laugh at me if you looked at it now. But back then, I was like, this is going to happen. It's here. Right? The use of big data for real-time operational use cases, it's here, and we have to be ready for it. And you need sub-second. Enhanced compliance capabilities. I have managed to get my company to agree to some pretty large investments over the last year, very foundational in data. And when I'm having those conversations, I'm kind of convinced the people who sign all the checks at the top that this is a good thing to do. And if I feel like I'm losing the argument a little bit, compliance every single time. The risk blast zone is enormous. And I'm not going to mention companies by name, but read the news. There's some pretty hefty fines being handed out. We're going to try to stay off the front page of your tech magazines from the fines that we have. But it's not just about being compliant today. We got ready for GDPR, then there was CCPA. There's more and more coming, and those things are going to change. They're getting tighter and more strict. I don't know what's going to come next. I can certainly stand and pontificate about where I think different states in the US are going to go. But it is going to change. So it's not just about being compliant today and being 100% accurate 100% of the time, but it's about being able to quickly react to what's coming next. And if every time there's a tweak to one of the laws, I need to go ask for $1 million to go, rebuild some custom thing, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. I had a meeting a week or two ago with kind of a data practice expert at a large consulting firm. It was just like a chat we were having. And I can't remember what statistic he threw out. But the story he was telling is about the high number of companies that start on a giant data transformation and just never finish it. It just kind of does. It doesn't end. It doesn't die. It just kind of just fades out, and people and then you end up with a little bit of data in Teradata, some in Snowflake, some in Hadoop, some in Redshift, some in BigQuery. That's my story. So I can attest to that. So hopefully, as I kind of go through the journey that we've been on at Disney, the journey that we're still on at Disney right now, hopefully there's some useful nuggets in there. Some of this helps. I do very much like the idea of kind of starting small, one thing at a time. Don't boil the ocean. We don't need a big bang, project that's going to do it all, because it's pretty risky that's going to fizzle out and die. And I'll just reiterate before I kind of close. I can try to take a couple of questions. I have a few minutes. I do have to run out of here for another session that I have over at Caesar's Palace. But data liquidity, if you focus there, if you make that the core of your data strategy, maybe you can't sell that to your CEO. Maybe it's just too boring for them. So maybe you need to talk about large language models. But somewhere in there needs to be liquidity. Somewhere there needs to be data architecture. Somewhere there needs to be data management and data governance. And if you get that right, if you have it right now, great. If you don't, start getting it right now. And you'll find yourself probably, at least middle of the pack in your generative AI race, sometime soon. So that's all. Hope you found it useful. Thanks for your time today. I got to leave you with a Walt quote. I have to. So if there's any questions, if not, I know there were, a couple of people have reached out to me over LinkedIn in the last couple of weeks to, grab a quick meet. I'm happy to do that as well here. Okay, good. Yeah. Data contracts is, I didn't talk about that at all today, is a huge part of our strategy. I think I would say we're probably on the kind of leading edge of data contracts right now, and the way that we're doing our data. That's absolutely huge. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I forgot they asked me to repeat questions, so I'll repeat. Would there be anything that I do differently, or that I tell myself if I can go back in time when we start with Snowflake? Yeah, I mean, I think I would engage Snowflake. They're the experts. We've gotten a lot of value, probably a little later than we should have, with like Snowflake's solution architects, who have been, I think, pretty key in helping us shape the right path from a technical standpoint. The lift and shift that we did scared me a little bit, because I was like, what are we doing? And how are we ever going to fix that? Like, we're going to spend all this money to lift and shift. We're never going to have that money then to go back in time and refactor. Like, I wanted to do it all right away. It was impossible, and I'm glad it was impossible, because I might have pushed to do a great big giant project. I think that was the right thing for us, like, because that was, again, our motivation: get out of the cloud and get some wins there. I do think that was the right way to do things, but have the roadmap. If you're not going to refactor as you move, have the roadmap to refactor, or you're kind of just shifting the problem. Again, you can make improvements to that legacy data architecture just by Snowflake compute. Just by itself makes things better, but you're still going to be stuck, right? We were all joking in the hallway out here. Everything's LLMs, and that's exciting. I'm super excited about it. Don't get me wrong. We're absolutely working on it. Yeah, but the data's not there. It's not ready. You're only going to go so far. Like, we can put a large language model into production probably pretty quickly. And Frank in the keynote yesterday was saying, yeah, everybody's going to race for large language models. You're going to spend all this money and be like, oh, what am I having for dinner tonight? And like, that's cool, and I feel like if you don't fix the data, that's all you're ever going to do. So whether you do it on the way into Snowflake or not, and then optimize. Optimize while you do it, optimize afterwards. Build that in, constant, and build in, like, how am I going to monitor my costs, continually optimize those costs, get some experts on your team who know how to do it, who've done it before. Go see Rory. I think he already left.